we are going to be checking out two F1 guys, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, two guys that I've seen before, two guys that I've reviewed before. On this channel, what I do is I look at all different types of people's communication skills and I give you my thoughts. And what I do for a living is I help people with their communication skills. All right, let's get right into this.
Well, this is coming down the pit
We're
lane.
in the pit lane, isn't it?
Yep. Turn to.
I think Bahrain,
go straight. I think Bahrain.
You're right.
It is.
There you go. It's true. It's
The
possible.
ulterior kid is true.
Yeah, Oscar seems like more mechanical. You know, he seems like the type of guy that he went to school to study Formula One. You know, he seems like that type of guy who's just like a textbook type of thinker, very kind of logical and rational. Whereas Lando seems to be more of like the gregarious, outgoing, you know, more emotional one. Whereas Oscar, he does seem to be a little bit more like structured and thorough in his thinking and in his communication.
Turn one.
The distance from the pit lane to the first corner is always different depending on the track. It sounded like we got up to like, I don't know, 5th gear or 6th gear, and then we went down a lot of gears, which means it's a slow corner. And then the next corner seemed pretty quick. I thought it would be Bahrain.
Yeah, but he's got a pretty good personality. Like, I don't mean to paint Oscar as like some nerd who's like, you know, Mr. Textbook, just sort of like boring dude. Like, first of all, I think he makes an effort to actually engage with the audience. I think from like a PR perspective, like you can see him looking at the camera. I don't actually think he's awkward. I think he's actually improved in terms of his comfort level, his comfortability in front of the camera since the last time I saw him. Like, he's looking, you can tell he's like making an effort to engage with the audience. So he's socially aware. You know, it's not like he's in his own world of technicalities and definitions. He's not in his own world. So he does have that social awareness. And yeah, I actually do think he's got a pretty good personality in terms of him being funny. You can see he's got a sense of humor about him. And I think also just from a communication standpoint, he did a good job there, like simplifying the language. Although like he comes across as very thorough and technical, his breakdown right there was quite simple and like easy for anyone who's watching this to understand, right?
5th gear or 6th gear, and then we went down a lot of gears, which means it's a slow corner.
I wonder why F1 drivers have to get weighed after a race.
Interesting.
Do you know why?
So we have a minimum weight limit of 798 kilograms, including the car. That's why we get weighed, just to make sure that we're not under the weight limit, because obviously that's an advantage. We weigh ourselves before the session as well, because then the engineers have a good idea of what we're going to weigh so that we're not underweight and disqualified.
He seems to kind of be the guy who knows everything, a well of knowledge over here. You know, that's the vibe that he's giving. He's giving the vibe that like you trust him. Like he's very trustworthy. That's what I get from Oscar. Like he's very believable.
You get 25 if you win, you get 18 if you're second, 15 if you're third, 12 if you're fourth, and then once you get to 5th, it's 10, and then it keeps dropping by 2s until you get to 10th, you get 1 point. And then anyone finishes from 11th to 20th, they don't get any points.
Yeah, he seems very patient, Oscar. Like that's his delivery. It's very patient and calm and collected. I think that's where the trustworthiness comes from. That's where the believability comes from. And like he's making it a point, he's almost like taking on this teacher tone and this teacher role where he's like making it a point to look at us and explain things in this simple language. And a lot of people who follow F1 probably know this, but you know, for me who's not really into the sport and doesn't really understand the sport, I think he's doing an incredible job explaining it to like the average person. So I think that's actually a very underrated skill as a communicator, to be able to explain things in simple, easy to understand, easy to digest terms. Because he can easily get bogged down in something called the curse of knowledge. Maybe some of you have heard of this, the curse of knowledge, which is essentially just saying when we're really into something, we assume that other people know what we know. So I'm impressed with his communication skills.
You see your car?
Yeah.
The first bit of like ground that you can see, like probably 10 meters ahead. When you're driving, you're kind of just focusing on what's ahead of you. Even like, you know, we have the halo, protects our head, but you don't really see it because similar to like your nose, you're looking far enough ahead that it kind of, your mind just blurs it out.
And Lando's doing a good job here. Lando's doing a good job here too. I don't want to take anything away from Lando's explanations. He seems to be a little bit more non-verbal with his explanations. Like he uses his gestures more, and you know he seems to be communicating in that way, just sort of like, you know, adding as many visual cues as he can to his communication. which I think is a good strategy as well, right? It helps the audience further absorb and gives them another way to digest that information that you're communicating. Like if I had to guess, I think Oscar's, he's more of the introverted one, right? Where you look at a Lando Norris who's like very gesture heavy and he projects his voice a little bit more and he moves around and you see him smiling, he's more animated. Yeah, totally different styles with these two. Hard for me to really get like a sense of their friendship.
You kind of want to be able to communicate with your team without giving away too much information because all the other teams can listen to each other's radio. That's why you never hear anyone say what lap they're going to pit, because then you tell the whole pit lane what your strategy is. From Amber Lounge Limited. What's your favorite F1 car shape? Well, we grew up watching like 2010s.
Yeah, he's really interesting, Oscar, just as a communicator, because again, he's not very animated, but he's not like withdrawn and he's not disengaged from the camera and the audience. If you look at the amount of eye contact he's making with the camera, aka the audience, he's doing that quite a lot. So this is like an effort on his part to be more engaging, I think. Because maybe he knows, maybe it's like he's not an animated person, so he's not going to put it on. Like that's just not part of his personality. He's not going to put on the big smile and, open his eyes wide and use his gestures. That's just not within himself to do. He has his own ways of engaging with the audience.
Everything here is to do with technology. How they build it, how they design it, make it. It just drives differently, very different. Like no power steering. Now we have power steering. So from step one to the end, basically everything is changed or a lot more advanced nowadays.
Lando's very engaging, but I feel like he's more conversational, right? Like when Lando's speaking, I feel like there's more of a relatability component to him. He's just sort of speaking a little bit more naturally, kind of in a way that I feel like he'd speak off camera. Whereas, it feels like Oscar's putting on a little bit more of like a TV host, sort of like teacher, I'm going to teach you, and both are good, both are engaging in their different ways, and they're their different styles. But yeah, it's interesting. I find Lando to be quite relatable actually, and I think that's a relatable quality in a communicator and a speaker, someone who speaks in a way that you feel like they would speak off camera, at home, with their family and friends, with their tone and their language. I feel like Lando's not changing the language that he's using on camera here. So again, I find that very relatable.
One other thing we do a few days before the race is walk the track.
To see if there's anything new that's changed from the year before, or if it's a new circuit or a track we haven't been to.
Just looking at the curbs, what things to avoid, what places you definitely don't want to over push, what places you can push.
We have some plans about what we might want to do in the race. If there's one pit stop or two or three.
Yeah, I feel like, when you think about like how exciting they are when they're speaking, Oscar has to make an effort to go up and down with his tone and his inflection.
Plans about what we might want to do in the race.
Whereas Lando's more naturally kind of engaging and naturally sort of up and down with his pitch patterns and his inflection. Now I think Oscar probably recognizes that like his baseline is probably just a little bit more monotone based on his personality. So I think like he has to almost be extra aware of kind of turning it on and taking it up a notch from time to time so he doesn't lose his audience.
If you're coming from a really long straight into a slow corner, you need to brake a lot more than if you're coming into a fast corner.
So there's all the questions for today.
Thank you very much for watching.
I feel like Lando was a little bit more reserved in this video. Maybe he was tired, but he didn't necessarily seem like too thrilled to be doing this. And I don't know, I've seen him in environments where it feels like he's just more out of his shell and more gregarious and outgoing. He was fine, but he wasn't having like the same amount of fun that he usually has. Other than that, guys, if you want to watch my uncut reaction and analysis, all you need to do is go to my Patreon page, where I've also included an exclusive reaction to Lando Norris on the chicken shop date. So if you're interested in watching any of that, I've included the link in my description below. Other than that, my name is Max. I will catch you soon. Peace.